My lawyer wrote to me. Call me immediately. He told me the terrible truth about my daughter. Get ready for today's story, but first, hit like, share the love, and subscribe to our channel. My name's Walter Clay, though most folks around here just call me Walt. I'm 79 now, and I live out by the edge of town in a little house that used to be blue before the sun and the years decided it should be gray instead. The porch boards creak when I walk on them. The coffee's always lukewarm by the time I sit down, and I like it that way. The days move slower now, and I've found that suits me fine. Now, I'm not much for telling long stories, though I seem to have gotten better at it since I ran out of people who can interrupt me, but this one's been sitting heavy in my chest for a few years. It started with a letter, a real paper letter, the kind that shows up in your mailbox and not on some screen. It was from my lawyer, a man named Harold Klein. I've known Harold near 40 years, since back when we were both still spry enough to climb ladders and argue about fishing spots. These days he walks with a cane and wears those glasses that get dark in the sunlight, which always makes him look more dramatic than the situation calls for. Anyway, the letter came on a Wednesday. Wednesdays are my grocery day. I stop by that little market on Route 8, pick up bread, a carton of milk, and whatever fruit doesn't look half dead. I don't rush much. By the time I got home that afternoon, the mail was sitting in the box, a couple of bills, a coupon book, and then, there it was, an envelope with Harold's name printed on it. At first I figured it was just some tax nonsense or an update on my will. But then I noticed the red stamp on the corner that said, "Urgent. Call immediately." Now, Harold's the kind of man who still writes "Sincerely yours" on birthday cards. So seeing that word "urgent" in big red letters, well, that got my attention. I set my groceries down on the counter, poured myself a cup of cold coffee, and stood there staring at the envelope. It's funny how a piece of paper can just sit there and change the air in a room. I remember thinking, whatever's in there, life before it and life after it aren't going to be the same. When I finally opened it, the letter was short, only 2 lines typed in that stiff old font Harold uses. "Walt, call me immediately. I need to talk to you about your daughter, Emily. It's urgent." That was it. No details, no warmth, just that. Now, I have one daughter, Emily, and she's been the better part of my heart since the day she was born. Her mama, Margaret, passed when Emily was 8, and it's been just the 2 of us ever since. She grew up good, bright, stubborn as a mule, kind in a quiet way. She went off to college, moved down to North Carolina, started a family of her own. We talked every week, sometimes more. So reading that letter, my first thought was something happened to her. I picked up the phone right then, didn't even take my shoes off. It rang 6 times before Harold answered, and when he did, his voice was low and strained. "Walt," he said, "thank God you called. I was hoping you'd see the letter today." "What's going on?" I asked him. My throat had gone dry. "Is it Emily?" There was a pause on the other end, just long enough for my heart to start doing that slow, painful thump it does when you're waiting for bad news. "Walt," he said again, "I need you to come into the office. It's about something serious, something that can't be said over the phone." Now, if you've lived long enough, you know what that means. People don't make you drive into town to tell you your kid won a prize. They do it because there's something they don't want to say in words that can be recorded or overheard or taken the wrong way. "Just tell me." I said, "Please," but Harold wouldn't. All he said was, "It's about Emily's estate, Walt. I'll explain when you get here." Her estate. That word hit me like a hammer. You don't use that word about someone who's fine and breathing. You use it about someone who's gone. My knees buckled a little, and I grabbed the counter. "Harold," I said, "you tell me right now, is my daughter dead?" But he didn't answer right away. I heard him sigh, long and slow, and then he said, "Walt, just come down here, all right? Please." That's all he gave me. I remember hanging up and standing there in the kitchen, the light coming in through the window just right, so it caught all the little dust specks in the air. Everything was too quiet. The clock ticked louder than it ever had before. I didn't cry, not yet anyway. You reach a certain age and you learn how to hold off on crying until you've got the facts. I grabbed my keys, got in my old Chevy, and started down the road toward town. The sun was setting low, and the fields on either side were gold and empty. I don't remember much of the drive except for the feeling that the world had shrunk down to that two-lane road, and the question running circles in my mind: what happened to my Emily? When I pulled up outside Harold's office, his car was parked in its usual spot, a little crooked as always. I went inside, and his secretary gave me that look people give when they know something you don't want to hear. She said, "He's waiting for you, Mr. Clay," and her voice had that careful tone, the one folks use when they're trying not to break something that's already cracked. I walked into Harold's office. He was sitting behind his big oak desk, papers spread out everywhere. He stood when he saw me, but he didn't smile. He just motioned for me to sit down. "Walt," he said softly, "there's no easy way to say this." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. "Emily," he said, "was in an accident." He paused, swallowed, and looked at me with eyes that were too full of pity. Then he said, "She didn't make it." The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your ears. I felt like someone had turned down the volume on the whole world. After a long moment, I asked, "When?" 3 days ago," he said, "in North Carolina. A car crash." I sat there, hands gripping the edge of the chair, staring at a spot on the wall behind him. I didn't know what to do with the words he'd just said. 3 days ago, my daughter had been alive. 3 days ago, she might have been laughing, cooking dinner, reading to her kids, and now, just like that, she wasn't. I asked him a few questions, but they all felt pointless. The only thing I wanted was to hear her voice, and I knew I couldn't. After a few minutes, Harold slid a folder across the desk toward me. "There's something else," he said. "Something you need to know, and it's why I had to see you in person." I looked at the folder. My name was written across the front in blue ink. "Walt," he said, lowering his voice, "there's a letter from Emily inside, dated a month ago. It was left with her will." He paused. "And I think it's going to change everything you thought you knew about her." I stared at that folder for a long time before I opened it. And when I finally did, what I found inside wasn't what any father ever expects to see. I must have sat there for a good 5 minutes just staring at that folder like it might catch fire if I touched it. Harold didn't rush me. He knew better than that. He just sat there behind his desk, fingers steepled under his chin, watching me the way a man watches someone trying to walk across a frozen pond. Finally, I reached for it. My hand was trembling a little, which irritated me, because I never liked to show weakness in front of anyone, even an old friend. But the truth was, I could feel my heart beating in my fingertips. The folder was thicker than I expected. Inside was a single envelope with my name written across it in Emily's handwriting, neat, small, with those little curls at the ends of her L's that she got from her mother. Beneath it were a few typed pages that looked like legal documents. I pushed those aside. All I could see was that envelope. It was sealed. Pale yellow paper like something out of a stationery set from the 80s. My name, Dad. Just that. I took a breath and looked at Harold. "Can I?" "Of course," he said. "It's yours." So I opened it. The smell hit me first, something faintly floral, like the lotion she used when she was younger. It took me back to when she was 15 and would borrow her mother's perfume before school, thinking I wouldn't notice. I unfolded the pages. There were 3 of them, handwritten in blue ink. Her handwriting hadn't changed much. The first line made my stomach twist. "Dad, if you're reading this, then something's happened to me." I closed my eyes for a second. I wasn't ready for that sentence. She went on. "Please don't be angry that you had to find out this way. I know you've always hated surprises, but there was no other way to tell you what I need to say." I looked up at Harold. "What's she talking about?" He just shook his head. "Keep reading, Walt." So I did. There's something I've kept from you for a long time. I didn't mean to. It just got harder to say the longer I waited. I thought maybe someday I'd find the right time, but time has a funny way of running out before we realize it. She always did have a way of talking like she was twice as old as she was. "Dad, I have another daughter." I froze. I had to read that line again, slower this time. "Another daughter." It took me a second to realize what she meant. Emily had 2 kids that I knew about, Sam and Lily, my grandkids. Sam's 12 now and Lily just turned 9. But she said another daughter. Not a daughter, not I had a child, another. I looked up again. "Harold, what the hell is she talking about?" He didn't answer right away. He just sighed, rubbed his temples, and said, "Keep reading, Walt." I went back to the page. Before I married Tom, when I was in college, I had a baby, a little girl. I was 19. I didn't tell you because I was scared of disappointing you, scared of what people would think, scared because I didn't know what I was doing. My hands started to shake. I sat back in the chair, trying to catch my breath. Her name is Grace. I gave her up for adoption. I thought it was the right thing to do at the time. I wanted her to have a better life than I could give her back then, but I never stopped thinking about her. I never stopped wondering if she was okay. I could hear her voice in those words, gentle, honest, breaking a little. A few months ago, she found me. We met. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want to make it a big thing until I knew what it meant. But, Dad, she's wonderful. She's smart and kind and has your sense of humor, if you can believe it. She wanted to meet you. I told her I'd talk to you first, that I needed to figure out how to explain everything, but I never got the chance. The letter trailed off there for a moment. There were smudges on the paper like she'd cried while writing it. Her name is Grace Miller now. She lives in Asheville. I'm giving Harold her contact information. Please reach out to her, Dad. Please. She doesn't have anyone else who knows where she came from. You're her family, too. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the tears hit the page. They left little dark spots where the ink bled. I folded the letter back up, real careful, like it might fall apart if I handled it too roughly. Then I set it down on Harold's desk. I had a granddaughter, I said quietly, and I never knew. Harold nodded. You still do, Walt. I looked at him, my mind spinning. You mean she's alive, and she's been asking about you. I leaned back, rubbing my face. This is a lot to take in, Harold. I know. You knew about this? Not until after Emily passed. Her husband brought me the will. He didn't know about the letter either. Emily left instructions for me to give it to you personally. Grace contacted me 2 days ago after hearing about the accident. She's been waiting to hear from you. I didn't know what to say. There are moments in life when your whole sense of reality tilts, like the world shifts under your feet just a few inches, but enough to make you lose your balance. That's what this felt like. I had spent 79 years thinking I knew my life story. The chapters were all written, the lessons all learned. And then out of nowhere, someone hands you a new page that rewrites everything. I took a slow breath. What does she want from me? Harold smiled a little. I think she just wants to meet her grandfather. I looked down at the letter again. The way she wrote, please reach out to her, Dad. There was something in that, an urgency, a hope. I don't even know where to start, I said. Harold reached into a folder and slid over a slip of paper. Here, that's her phone number and address. I talked to her briefly, told her I'd deliver your letter today. She said she understands if you're not ready to talk yet. I stared at that piece of paper like it was some kind of sacred document. On it was written a name, Grace Miller, and a North Carolina phone number. Do you want me to call her? Harold asked gently. I shook my head. No, if there's a call to be made, I'll make it. He nodded and didn't push. We talked for a little while longer about arrangements, funeral services, estate stuff, but my head wasn't in it. I just kept thinking about that name. Grace. On the drive home, the sky was darkening, that deep purple blue that comes just before night. I rolled down the window and let the cool air hit my face. It felt like I'd been holding my breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. When I got home, I sat down on the porch, letter in hand. The crickets were out, singing their slow, tired songs. I thought about Emily at 19, scared and alone, making a choice no young woman should have to make by herself. I thought about all the times she called me stubborn, and I laughed because she must have gotten that from me. Maybe that's why she never told me. I pulled my old flip phone from my pocket. It's not much, but it does what I need it to, and stared at the number on that paper. I must have typed it 3 times and deleted it before finally pressing call. It rang twice. Then a voice answered. Hello? It was a woman's voice, young but not too young, maybe late 20s, early 30s. I froze. My tongue felt thick. Is this Grace Miller? Yes, it is. Who's calling? I swallowed hard. My name's Walter Clay. There was silence for a moment. Then she said softly, "You're my grandfather." It wasn't a question, just a fact. I started, then stopped. I didn't know what to say next. "I just got your mother's letter today." "I know," she said. Her voice cracked a little. "Mr. Klein told me he was giving it to you." I'm sorry," I said, "about everything. I didn't know." "I didn't either," she said, "not until a few months ago." We sat there in silence for a few seconds, both of us trying to find our footing in this strange new place we suddenly shared. Finally, she said, "She talked about you a lot, you know. She said you were the kindest man she'd ever known." I had to look away. The porch light was flickering, and for some reason that small, ordinary thing broke me. "She was the best of me," I said. Grace's voice softened. "I wish I'd met her sooner." "Me too," I said quietly. There was a pause, and then she asked, "Would you maybe like to meet sometime?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure I could handle it yet. I'd just lost Emily, and the idea of meeting her hidden daughter, her echo, her continuation, felt like trying to look directly into the sun. But then again, what was the alternative? Sit here and let another chance at family slip away? "Yeah," I said finally. "Yeah, I'd like that." She sounded relieved. "I can drive up there this weekend if that's okay." "That'd be fine," I said. "It's a quiet town. You'll find it easy enough." We talked for another minute or two, about directions, about how to recognize the house, about how she liked her coffee. Black, no sugar, just like me. That made me smile. Before we hung up, she said something that stuck with me. "I don't want anything from you, Mr. Clay. I just want to know where I come from." And I told her, "Well, I reckon I can help with that." When I hung up, I sat there for a long time watching the stars come out. The grief was still there, sitting heavy in my chest, but under it, somewhere deeper, there was something else starting to stir. Something that felt a little like hope. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter spread out in front of me, reading it over and over. Every word felt like a bridge being built between the past and the present, between what I thought I knew and what really was. I thought about the last time I saw Emily. She'd come up with the kids for Thanksgiving. She made her mother's stuffing recipe, burnt the edges just the same way Margaret used to. She hugged me tight when she left, tighter than usual. Maybe she knew she wouldn't see me again. Maybe she'd been carrying that secret in her heart even then. The next morning, I went out to the shed and cleaned up a bit, like I always do when I need to think. I sharpened some tools, fixed a broken hinge, swept the floor. Routine's a kind of medicine when the world doesn't make sense. Around noon, I found myself looking at an old photograph pinned to the wall. Me, Margaret, and Emily at the lake, summer of '89. Emily's about 8 in that picture, missing a front tooth, holding up a fish half her size. I stared at that smile and thought about all the things I never knew about her life. By Friday, I had the guest room made up. Clean sheets, fresh towels, even dusted the picture frames. It felt strange, preparing for someone who was both a stranger and family. Saturday morning came bright and still. I made a pot of coffee and sat out on the porch, waiting. Every car that passed made my heart jump. Around 10 o'clock, a silver Honda pulled into the driveway. She stepped out slowly, looking around like she was trying to memorize everything. Tall, slender, brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. There was something in the way she stood, hands in her pockets, half smile on her face, that reminded me so much of Emily I had to look away for a second. When she saw me, she smiled wider. "Mr. Clay?" I nodded. "You must be Grace." We just looked at each other for a long moment. Then she walked up the steps, and before I could say another word, she hugged me. It wasn't a polite hug either. It was the kind that says, "I've been missing you my whole life and didn't even know it." I hugged her back, and for the first time in days, my chest loosened. After a while, we sat down on the porch. I poured her some coffee, and we just talked about her job, about Asheville, about the mother she never really got to know. She told me how Emily had found her through one of those DNA sites, how nervous they both were to meet, how they'd spent a whole afternoon just walking by the river, talking about everything and nothing. "She said she wanted to tell you," Grace said. "She just didn't want to hurt you." I nodded. "That sounds like her, always protecting everyone else." Grace smiled softly. She said you'd understand. I looked out at the yard, at the way the light hit the old oak tree by the fence. I'm trying to, I said. We talked until the sun dipped low, and then I made us some sandwiches. It felt easy, like family dinners used to. When she laughed, she sounded so much like Emily it gave me chills. Before she left that evening, she stood on the porch, hands in her pockets again. "Can I come back next weekend?" she asked. I smiled. "You better." She laughed and nodded. "Okay, Grandpa." That word hit me in a way I wasn't ready for. Grandpa. After she drove away, I stood there a long time, listening to the crickets again. The house didn't feel so empty anymore. But later that night, when I was washing the dishes, I noticed something on the back of Emily's letter, something I hadn't seen before. A second note, written in the same handwriting but smaller, almost like she'd hesitated before writing it. It said, "Dad, there's more I need to tell you about Grace. Please don't judge until you know everything. Harold has the rest of the papers. Ask him." I set the letter down slowly. What more could there possibly be? I said aloud to no one. The night outside was quiet, but suddenly it felt heavier. I looked at the folded note again, that last line trembling in my hands. And I knew sleep wouldn't be coming easy that night. I didn't sleep much that night. I must have turned that letter over 100 times, reading that last line again and again. Ask Harold. It was just 3 words, but they felt like a locked door in the middle of my mind, one I couldn't decide if I wanted to open. By morning, the sun was coming in weak through the blinds, turning the kitchen into that gray kind of light that makes everything look like it's been sitting untouched for years. I made a pot of coffee, strong enough to scrape paint, and sat down at the table. The clock ticked too loud, the kind of sound you notice only when you've got something heavy to think about. "Ask Harold," I muttered under my breath. So that's what I did. Around 9, I called his office. His secretary picked up, the same soft-spoken woman with the nervous voice. When she put me through, Harold answered like he'd been expecting me. "Morning, Walt," he said, cautious. "You get any rest?" "Not much," I told him. I read the letter again, found that note at the end. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing slow through the receiver. "Ah," he said quietly, "you saw that." "I did," I said, "and I reckon I'm ready to hear whatever else there is." "You sure about that? I wouldn't be calling if I wasn't." He sighed. "All right. Can you come by the office? I think it'd be better if I showed you the documents in person." "Be there in 20, I said. The drive into town felt shorter this time, maybe because my mind was somewhere else entirely. The streets were quiet, just a few early risers walking dogs or getting coffee. The world has this strange way of carrying on like nothing's happened, even when your whole life's turned inside out. When I got to Harold's office, he was standing by the window, hands behind his back like a preacher about to deliver bad news. On his desk was another folder, thinner than the last one, but still too thick for comfort. He motioned for me to sit. "You sure you want to do this, Walt? You've been through a lot already." "Harold," I said, "just give it to me straight. I've lived through worse." He nodded, sat down, and opened the folder. "After Emily passed," he said, "I got a call from a law office in Asheville. They were handling some papers she'd filed just a few weeks before the accident. Among them were adoption records, old ones from back when she was 19. I swallowed hard. For Grace. Yes, but there's something unusual about them, something Emily didn't even know herself until recently." He slid a document across the desk toward me. It was a photocopy of an official record dated 1997. At the top it said, "State of North Carolina, Certificate of Adoption." The first thing I noticed was Grace's birth name, Baby Girl Clay. That hit me hard. Then I saw the adoptive parents' names, Mark and Evelyn Miller, and next to that the word "revised" in small stamped letters at the top corner. "What's that mean?" I asked. Harold adjusted his glasses. "It means the record was updated. There were changes to it." He turned a few more pages and pointed to a line at the bottom of a legal amendment. This was filed 6 months after Grace's birth. The Millers divorced. Evelyn retained custody. But here's where it gets complicated. He pulled out another paper, this one newer, dated just a year ago. Grace requested access to her sealed adoption file through a court petition. That's how she found Emily. But when the file was opened, there was an attached note from the adoption agency. It said the birth father's identity was never confirmed. Never confirmed? I frowned. Emily didn't know who. She thought she did, Harold said gently, but the agency listed the name as unknown. Emily's college boyfriend, Tom, her husband now, he wasn't the father. She knew that. She told the agency she didn't want to name the man, but apparently she had her reasons. I felt my stomach drop. What kind of reasons? He hesitated, looking down at his hands. Walt, this is where things get delicate. Go on. He turned one last page and slid it toward me. It was a letter, folded once, on the same yellow stationery Emily had used for mine. This was addressed to you, Harold said, but she didn't include it with the first one. She left it sealed with the adoption documents. I didn't want to give it to you until you were ready. I took it slowly, feeling the weight of it in my hands. My name was written across the front again, same neat handwriting. I opened it carefully, heart hammering in my chest. Dad, there's something I couldn't tell you when I was 19, something I should have told you sooner, but I didn't know how. The man who fathered Grace was someone you knew, someone who worked for you back then. I stopped reading. My mouth went dry. When Emily was 19, I was still running the hardware store. I had a few part-time helpers, mostly college kids earning beer money. My mind started flipping through faces, trying to match a name. His name was Daniel Kearns. He was 23 at the time. We were seeing each other for a few months secretly. I knew you wouldn't approve because he was older and he worked for you. When I found out I was pregnant, he panicked, said he wasn't ready. I didn't want to drag you into it, so I made my choice alone. I sat there in silence, letter trembling in my hands. Daniel Kearns. I remembered him now. Tall, quiet kid with sandy hair. Worked summers at the store, good with customers, always respectful. He disappeared one fall, said he was moving out west. I never heard from him again. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I looked up at Harold. She never told me, not a word. He nodded slowly. She was scared, Walt, and ashamed, I think. She said in her letter that she didn't want you to think less of her or of him. Said Daniel had written once, years later, trying to find her, but she never responded. I rubbed my face with my hands. Good Lord, all these years, and I had no idea. There's more, Harold said quietly. Of course there was. He handed me another page, a letter from the Asheville agency dated just a few months ago. Grace's biological father contacted them recently, asking to be put in touch. He'd been trying to find her. I stared at him. You mean Daniel? Harold nodded. He's alive. He lives about an hour from Asheville, and he knows now that Emily's passed. I sank back in the chair, my heart pounding. Does Grace know? Yes. She met him, Walt, a few weeks before the accident. The room tilted a little. So she met both of them, Emily and Daniel, and now she has you. I didn't know what to do with that. My mind was spinning with faces from the past, regrets piling up faster than I could count. I felt a kind of sorrow that didn't come from any single thing, but from everything, the years, the silence, the things left unsaid. I folded the letter back up and slid it into my jacket pocket. Thank you, Harold, I said quietly, for telling me straight. He nodded. You going to reach out to her again? Yeah, I said, but first, I need to sit with this a while. When I got home, the house felt different, like every picture on the wall was looking at me, waiting for me to explain something. I sat out on the porch again, the letter in my lap, and thought about that boy Daniel. He couldn't have been more than 23 when all that happened. I tried to remember what kind of man he was, but memory's a tricky thing. It keeps the details you don't need and loses the ones you do. What I remembered most was how polite he'd been, how he'd always called me Mr. Clay, even after I told him to quit with that. I never would have guessed he was the type to get my daughter pregnant and then disappear. But then again, maybe that's what scared kids do. The more I thought about it, the more I realized Emily must have carried that secret her whole life, and she'd still turned out to be the kindest person I ever knew. Maybe she'd forgiven him long ago. Maybe she'd even forgiven herself. But I hadn't forgiven anybody yet. That night I called Grace again. She picked up quick, like she'd been waiting. Hey, Grandpa, she said softly. I was hoping you'd call. Grace, I said, we need to talk. She hesitated. About Daniel? Yeah, I figured Harold might tell you. You knew? "Mom told me," she said quietly. "She told me everything the day we met. She said she didn't blame him, that she made her own choices. She said she forgave him." I nodded to myself, staring out into the dark yard. "That sounds like her." "He reached out to me after she passed," Grace said. "We've talked a few times. He's not what I expected. He seems sorry and lost, I think." I rubbed my thumb against the edge of the letter in my pocket. "Do you think he's a good man?" "I think he's a man who made a mistake and has spent the rest of his life trying to make up for it," she said. That hit me harder than I expected. We were both quiet for a while. Then I asked, "Would you be all right if I met him?" "You want to meet him?" she said, surprised. "I don't know what I want," I admitted, "but I think I need to." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I can ask him. I think he'd want that." We said good night after that, but I didn't sleep. I sat out on the porch until the moon was high, thinking about how strange it was that a man I'd hired decades ago would turn out to be part of my family in the most complicated way possible. The next morning, Grace called back. "He said yes," she told me. "He wants to meet tomorrow if you're up for it." "I'll be there," I said. I drove down to Asheville the next day. The road wound through the hills, the trees just starting to turn with autumn. It felt like driving into another lifetime. Grace met me at a small diner on the edge of town. She looked nervous but happy to see me, and sitting across from her nursing a cup of coffee was Daniel. He looked older, of course. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes, but I knew him the second I saw him. Same steady gaze. Same quiet posture. When he saw me, he stood up right away. "Mr. Clay," he said softly, "it's been a long time." I studied him for a moment, then nodded. "It has." We shook hands, and for a second I could feel both the young man he'd been and the ghost of all those years between. We sat down. Grace looked between us like a referee before the first round. Daniel cleared his throat. "I don't know how to start," he said. "I've replayed this moment 1,000 times in my head. None of it makes sense, and none of it makes up for what I did." I didn't say anything. I just let him talk. "I was scared," he said. "Emily was everything good in the world, and I didn't deserve her. When she told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I ran. It's the worst thing I've ever done. I kept my eyes on him. And now, he said, voice breaking a little, I just want to make things right. I don't know if that's possible, but I want to try." Grace reached across the table and touched his hand. "Mom forgave you," she said. He nodded. "I know. She told me, and I'll never understand why she did." I finally spoke. "Because she had a heart big enough for both of you." He looked at me then, eyes wet. "You raised her well, Mr. Clay." That got me. I had to look away for a second. We sat there a long time after that, just talking about Emily, about the years we'd all lost, about Grace, who sat between us like the living proof that forgiveness doesn't have to make sense to be real. When it was time to go, Daniel stood and said, "I don't expect your forgiveness, sir, but thank you for hearing me out." I stood too, reached out and shook his hand again. "You were a coward once," I said, "but it takes a brave man to come back." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "Thank you." As Grace and I drove back to her place, she said quietly, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," I said, "but I think Emily would have wanted me to." We were quiet for a long time after that. When I got home that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. It wasn't a perfect peace, not the kind that erases pain. It was the kind that settles over it like a blanket, softening the edges. I sat out on the porch again, same old spot, the sky painted with stars. I took out Emily's letter and read it one last time, the paper worn and soft from all my handling. "Grace," I whispered, "you got your mother's heart. That's what's going to save you." And maybe in some quiet way it was saving me too. But I didn't know then that there was still one more round, truth waiting to surface. Something neither Harold nor Emily nor even Grace had mentioned yet, and it was that final truth that would change everything all over again. The week after meeting Daniel passed in that strange, heavy way grief sometimes does, half real, half dream. I moved slower than usual, did my chores without thinking, and spent most evenings out on the porch watching the sun drag itself down behind the trees. The world felt quieter, but not empty. Grace called every day, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to tell me about her job or how her cat had knocked over a plant. Simple things. I liked those calls more than she probably knew. I'd started to think maybe life was settling again. Different, yes, but steadier. That's usually about the time life throws one last surprise your way. It was a Thursday afternoon, clear skies, a light breeze making the wind chimes sound like something out of an old hymn. I was fixing the gate out by the driveway when Harold's name popped up on my phone. I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered. "Afternoon, Harold," I said. "Don't tell me there's another letter." He chuckled a little, but it was forced. "Not a letter, Walt, but there's something else I need to talk to you about. Mind if I stop by? Now? Now would be good." I could tell from his tone this wasn't just a social visit. About 20 minutes later, his old Buick pulled up, spitting gravel like it always did. He got out slower than usual, carrying a small envelope and what looked like an official document folder under his arm. "Coffee?" I asked as he climbed the steps. He shook his head. "No, thanks. I won't be long." That was how I knew it was bad. Harold never turned down coffee. He sat down on the porch chair opposite me, the one that creaked the loudest. "Walt, before I start, I want you to know none of this changes who Emily was or how she felt about you." I frowned. "You're starting to sound like a man delivering a sermon before a confession," he sighed. "I guess I am." He opened the folder and pulled out a few papers. "Do you remember that will Emily filed, the one that included Grace?" "Yeah, well, there's a clause in it that took effect after her death. It's about something she wanted you to have, or rather, something she wanted you to know." He handed me the envelope. It wasn't yellow like the others, plain white, newer. Across the front it said, "For Dad, to be given only if necessary." I turned it over a few times. "Only if necessary? What's that supposed to mean?" "Read it," Harold said quietly. So I did. "Dad, if Harold's giving you this, it means you've already met Grace, and maybe Daniel too. I hope that went as well as it could. But there's one last thing I need you to understand. About me, about Grace, and about why I kept things the way I did." I felt that same knot tightening in my chest again. I took a deep breath and kept reading. "When I found Grace, I thought the hardest part would be facing her, explaining why I gave her up. But it wasn't. The hardest part was realizing something I'd spent my whole life trying not to see. Dad, Grace didn't just remind me of myself. She reminded me of Mom." My eyes stopped there. My hand went still. Margaret, my wife, gone for over 30 years. She had Mom's way of looking at people, like she could see right through your words to what you meant, and she had this little scar above her eyebrow, the same one Mom had. I asked her about it, and she said she'd had it since she was a baby from a fall. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I started doing some math. Dates, names, paperwork from the adoption agency. Something didn't add up. Grace was born in April of 1997, but Daniel left town in August of 1996. He couldn't have been there when she was conceived. I blinked, reading that line twice before it landed. I didn't want to believe it, so I dug into the records myself. The agency had the name Unknown Father listed, but tucked in the file was a note, a signature, faint and hard to read. "It looked familiar, Dad, very familiar. It was your handwriting." I stopped breathing for a second. "What the hell?" I muttered. My voice came out rough, almost a whisper. Harold shifted in his chair, looking uneasy. "Keep reading, Walt." I didn't want to, but I did. "Dad, I don't think you ever knew. I don't think Mom ever told you, but I found her old journal after she passed, the one she kept the year before she died. There were entries about someone she helped, a young woman in trouble. She never named her, but the details matched what I learned later. A teenager, pregnant, scared, from out of state. She said she was helping her find an adoption agency, keeping it private to protect everyone involved." My hands were trembling now. "Dad, I think Mom helped place your daughter, her own stepdaughter, without ever telling you. I think she knew Daniel wasn't the father, and she didn't want to break your heart. You were working long hours then, trying to keep the store afloat. I think she thought she was protecting you, but she wasn't. She was protecting me." The words blurred for a second. I blinked hard, read them again. "I don't know the whole truth. Maybe Mom had reasons I'll never understand. Maybe she was afraid the scandal would ruin everything. But she left a note at the back of the journal. It just said, 'He doesn't need to know. Love will fix what time cannot. I stared at that last sentence until the ink started to swim in front of my eyes. When I finally looked up, Harold was studying me like a man watching someone handle glass too thin to hold. "What does this mean, Harold?" I asked quietly. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" He took a long breath. "Walt, I've seen the documents. Emily was right. The dates don't match. And that handwriting in the file? I compared it to your old business forms. It's yours." I leaned back in the chair, dizzy. "That's not possible." He nodded slowly. "Maybe not consciously. Maybe Margaret filled out the paperwork for you. Maybe you signed something without knowing what it was. But the record stands. You're listed as the father on the sealed file." The porch felt too small all of a sudden. My heart was thudding so hard I could feel it in my ears. "So you're telling me," I swallowed hard, "Grace isn't just my granddaughter?" Harold's voice softened. "By blood, Walt, she's your daughter." I don't know how long I sat there without speaking. The only sound was the creak of the rocking chair and the wind moving through the chimes. "I didn't know," I whispered finally. "Harold, I swear to God, I didn't know." He put a hand on my shoulder. "I believe you." I felt sick. Not the kind of sick that makes you want to throw up, the kind that makes you feel hollow, like your bones don't fit right anymore. Margaret, sweet, steady Margaret, she must have known the whole time. She'd carried that secret to her grave. And Emily, my dear Emily, she'd lived her whole life thinking she was Grace's mother, when really, by blood, she was her sister. The world tilted again, the way it does when you realize the story you've been living isn't the one you thought it was. I stood up, walked to the edge of the porch, and stared out across the yard. The light was turning gold, long shadows stretching across the grass. I heard Harold stand behind me, waiting. "How could she do that?" I said quietly. "How could Margaret keep something like that from me?" "I don't know," Harold said softly. "Maybe she thought it would destroy you. Or maybe she was trying to save Emily's reputation. The world was different back then. People handled shame in strange ways." I rubbed my face. "She handled it right out of existence." We stood there in silence for a while. Then Harold said, "Grace doesn't know, Walt. Emily didn't tell her. I think she wanted you to decide whether she ever should." I turned around slowly. "You're saying I have to tell her?" He nodded. "If you think it's right." After Harold left, I sat on the porch until dark. The letter lay in my lap, the pages soft from sweat and tears. I thought about Margaret, how she'd smiled that last morning before the accident, how she'd kissed Emily's head and said, "Everything will be all right, Walt. You'll see." I'd thought she meant the bills, the store, the 1,000 little troubles of life. But maybe she'd meant something else entirely. And I thought about Grace, about how she'd smiled when she first called me Grandpa, about how she laughed like Emily used to, about how I'd felt something deep and familiar the moment I met her. Now I understood why. That night I didn't sleep at all. I sat at the table, the letter spread out in front of me, trying to decide what to do. There's no manual for this sort of thing. You can't Google how to tell someone they're your daughter when they think you're their grandfather. By morning, I still didn't have an answer, so I did the only thing I knew how to do. I called Grace. She picked up quick, cheerful. "Morning, Grandpa." My throat closed up a little at that word. "Morning, sweetheart. You got time to come by today?" "Sure. Everything okay? I just need to talk to you about something." Her voice softened. "All right, I'll be there this afternoon." When she pulled up around 3, the day was bright and warm. She brought a pie she'd baked, blueberry, her mom's favorite. We sat out on the porch, same as before. She chatted a bit about work, about how the mountains looked beautiful this time of year. I barely heard her. My mind was a storm. Finally, she noticed. "You okay, Grandpa?" I set my coffee down. "Grace, there's something I need to tell you. Something about your mother." She tilted her head, concern in her eyes. "What is it?" I took a deep breath. "When Emily found you, she also found some things about the adoption, about the past. She wanted you to know one day, but she wasn't sure how." Grace went quiet, her eyes narrowing a little. "What things?" I hesitated. The words felt like rocks in my mouth. "The man you were told was your biological father, Daniel. He isn't. The dates didn't match. The paperwork, it listed someone else." She frowned. "Who?" I looked at her, my heart breaking all over again. Me. For a second she didn't move and blink, just stared at me. What? She whispered. I didn't know, I said quickly. I swear to you, I didn't know. Your mother, Margaret, she must have handled it. I think she wanted to protect Emily. She raised her thinking she was your mother. But by blood, Grace, you're my daughter. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked down, then up again, searching my face for a lie. That can't be, she said finally, shaking her head. That doesn't make any sense. I know, I said softly. Believe me, I know. She stood up, started pacing the porch, arms crossed tight. So, Mom, Emily, she was my sister? I nodded. Half-sister, yes. She stopped walking and just stared out at the yard. For a long time, the only sound was the wind through the trees. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. All this time I've been trying to figure out where I come from, and now you're telling me. She trailed off. I'm telling you the truth, I said, the only truth I've got left to give. Tears welled in her eyes, and I stood, reaching out. She didn't pull away. I don't expect you to understand right now, I said. Hell, I barely understand it myself, but I love you. That's the one thing that hasn't changed. She looked up at me then, eyes red but steady. Did you love her, my mom, Margaret? With everything I had, I said, and I think she loved you too in her own way. She just didn't know how to handle it. She nodded slowly, then stepped forward and hugged me. It was different from the first time, tighter, heavier, full of both confusion and something like forgiveness. We stood like that for a long time until the light started to fade. When she finally pulled back, she said softly, You're still Grandpa to me, even if you're also Dad. That's not something I can untangle right now. That's all right, I said. We've got time. She smiled a little through the tears. Yeah, time. After she left, I sat back down, staring out at the horizon. The world had turned upside down twice in as many weeks, but somehow it felt like it was settling again. Not neatly, not perfectly, just honestly. I thought about what Margaret had written in her journal, Love will fix what time cannot. Sun barely up, air still cool enough that the grass looked silver. I made a cup of coffee and carried it out to the porch. For the first time in days, I noticed how the light hit the fields. Everything was soft and patient. I tried to pray, but the words didn't come out right. It had been years since I'd done that properly, and the only thing that felt true was, help me make this right. By 9 o'clock, I decided to drive out to the cemetery. Margaret and Emily were buried beside each other under a big oak tree that drops acorns like rain in the fall. The gravel road was quiet, and when I pulled in, there was no one else around, just the sound of the wind moving through the branches. Their graves were simple, 2 matching stones, no fancy angels or marble, just their names and a line Margaret had once picked out herself, Love Remains. I crouched down and brushed the leaves off their markers. Well, I said softly, you sure did leave me with a puzzle, didn't you? The wind answered, as it usually does when you talk to the dead. I don't know what you were thinking, Maggie. Maybe you thought you were sparing us. Maybe you were afraid. I can't be mad at you. Not really. But I wish you'd trusted me to handle it. I wish you'd told me the truth." My voice cracked a little. "And Emily, you carried something no one your age should have had to. You loved that girl so much you tried to be her mother when you were just a child yourself. I hope you know I'm proud of you, even if I didn't say it enough." I sat there a while, letting the quiet do its work. Before I left, I said, "I'm going to do right by her, by Grace. I don't know how yet, but I will." When I got home, I called Grace. No voicemail this time. She picked up on the first ring. "Hey," she said, voice gentle. "You doing okay?" "I'm holding up," I said. "How about you?" A pause. Trying to wrap my head around it. Been a lot to take in. "Yeah, I know." Then I said, "Listen, there's a place I'd like to take you. Somewhere I used to go with your mom when she was your age." She hesitated. "Where?" "Up by the lake. About an hour north. Nothing fancy. Just quiet. Thought maybe we could talk more there." After a moment, she said, "Okay. When?" "Tomorrow morning." The drive up to Lake Millersfield took us through back roads lined with pines and old farmhouses. Grace drove her own car and followed behind me, probably so she'd have the option to leave if things got too heavy. I didn't blame her. When we got there, I parked by the little picnic area where the grass grows up through the cracks in the pavement. The lake was calm, sunlight flashing off the ripples. She got out of her car, walked over, hands in her jacket pockets. "This is pretty," she said. "Yeah," I replied. "Hasn't changed much since the 80s. I used to bring Emily here to skip stones." We walked down to the edge of the water and sat on an old wooden bench. Ducks drifted near the far side, heads bobbing. I waited for her to speak first. After a while she said, "I don't even know what to call you anymore." "Call me Walt," I said with a little laugh. "That'll cover all bases." She smiled a little. "You always make it sound simple." "It's not simple," I admitted, "but I figure the only way through something like this is one honest conversation at a time." She nodded. "It's weird, you know. I keep looking at you and trying to see it, the connection. And it's there, kind of, the way we both tilt our heads when we're thinking, the same little squint when the sun hits our eyes. I used to think I got that from Mom. Guess that still makes sense." "Yeah," I said quietly, "it does." We watched the water for a long time. Then she asked, "Do you ever wish you could start over?" I thought about that one. Sure, everyone does, I guess. But the older you get, the more you realize starting over isn't really the point. It's about making peace with where the story already went. She picked up a flat rock and tossed it. It skipped twice, then sank. I'm trying. It just feels like I lost her all over again. First I lose Mom, Emily, and then I lose what I thought we were. "I know," I said. "I lost her twice, too." We sat there in silence again, just the sound of the water and a few kids laughing somewhere down the shore. After a while, she said, "You know what's strange? I'm not angry. Not really. Shocked, yeah, sad. But something about it almost feels like a gift. Like I got more of her than I thought. I'm part of both of you." "That's a good way to see it," I said. She smiled faintly. "You always talk like you're narrating a movie." "Comes with age," I said. "When you've told enough stories, they start telling you back." We spent the afternoon there, talking about little things, her childhood memories, Emily's favorite songs, what kind of pie Margaret used to make. None of it solved anything, but it built something new, something steadier. When the sun started dropping, she stood up and said, "Thank you for bringing me here." "Anytime," I said. "This bench is yours now, too." She looked out across the lake one last time. I think Mom would have liked that. After that day, things got easier. Not perfect, but easier. Grace started visiting more. Sometimes we didn't even talk about the past. We'd just sit on the porch, sipping lemonade, arguing about whether the Cardinals or the Blue Jays were louder this year. She started calling me Pop, once in a while half joking, testing it out like a new pair of shoes. It made me smile every time. One evening in late summer, she came by with an old photo album she'd found in a storage box from Emily's house. "Thought you might want to look through this," she said. We opened it together. There were pictures of Emily as a little girl, missing teeth, messy pigtails, holding a sparkler on the 4th of July. Then a few from her college years, smiling beside a group of friends, hair sun-bleached and wild. Near the back, tucked behind a loose page, there was a Polaroid I'd never seen before. It was me, younger, standing beside Margaret on that same lake shore. Emily was maybe 5, on my shoulders. Margaret's arm was around my waist, her smile calm and tired in that way mother's smiles sometimes are. Behind us, barely visible in the frame, was another woman, young, maybe 18, standing off to the side holding a newborn. Her face was turned away, but something about her posture looked familiar. Grace pointed. "Who's that?" I squinted. I don't know. Could be one of Margaret's cousins. But even as I said it, I felt a twinge in my gut. She looked closer. "I think that's me." I stared at her, then at the picture again. "You think?" "Look at the blanket," she said. "It's the one Mom Emily kept in her closet, the blue one with the yellow stars. I found it when I was a kid." I felt my breath catch. She was right. That meant Margaret had known. She'd brought that young woman, the birth mother, whoever she was, to that lake. To us. Maybe that was her way of saying goodbye, of closing the circle before the adoption went through. The photo trembled in my hand. Grace touched my arm gently. "Hey," she said, "it's okay. It's in the past." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, just didn't expect to see it staring back at me." We slid the photo back into the album, closed the cover. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You know, Pop, maybe this is what love really is. Messy, complicated, but still showing up. You and Grandma and Mom, all of you did what you thought was right at the time. Maybe that's enough." Her words settled over me like the evening light, soft, steady, true. "Yeah," I said, "maybe it is." That fall, we started a new tradition. Every Sunday, Grace would come over for dinner. Sometimes she'd bring a pie, sometimes just herself. We'd eat on the porch and watch the leaves change, and the space between us, once filled with shock and silence, started to feel warm again. Neighbors began to notice, too. Old Mrs. Hendricks across the road said one afternoon, "That granddaughter of yours sure looks like you." Grace and I just smiled at each other. "Runs in the family," she said. After she left that night, I sat on the porch long after dark. The air had that crisp edge that says winter's coming. I thought about how, even after all the lies and secrets, what remained was something real, something that looked a lot like Grace living up to her name. And I realized forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened. It's about letting it stand and still choosing to love anyway. The next morning, I found an old notebook in my desk and started writing everything down, every letter, every memory, every truth I could piece together. Not for me, but for her. For the day she might want to know everything in order. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "For Grace," because the story deserves to be told by someone who finally knows how it ends. Then I smiled, closed the book, and went to make coffee. Because life doesn't stop for revelation, it just keeps rolling, one sunrise at a time. But I didn't know yet that one more surprise was waiting for us, something that would test that new peace we'd built and remind me that love, like truth, never really finishes what it starts. That winter came in slow, like it was feeling polite about the whole thing. The air turned sharp, the mornings frosted over, and the creek out back got its thin shell of ice that never quite froze solid. Grace kept her Sunday visits, though now she brought stew instead of pie. We'd eat inside by the fire, 2 bowls, 2 spoons, no TV. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we'd just listen to the wood crack. It was the kind of quiet that felt earned. One evening she said, "You ever think about moving closer to me? There's a little apartment above the bookstore downtown, has your name written all over it." I laughed. "And miss my creaky porch and my view of the cows? Not a chance." She smiled. "You're stubborn. Runs in the family." That made her laugh, and I liked the sound of it so much I didn't bother hiding it. It was a small thing, but it felt like life itself, a second chance, breathing slow. Then around mid-January, I got a letter. No red stamp this time, no official seal, just plain paper, written in a hand I didn't recognize. "Mr. Clay, my name's Rebecca. You don't know me, but I was a nurse at Millersfield General when your daughter Margaret passed. I recently came across something among old patient files, something that may belong to you. If you're willing, please call me. I think it might help you understand what your wife was carrying when she died. At first, I thought maybe it was a scam. Folks send strange things when they hear about an inheritance. But she'd signed it with a full name and a phone number, and something about the tone felt decent. not greedy, curious, kind. I set it aside for a day, pretending I wasn't going to call. Then the next morning I did. She answered soft-spoken, sounded maybe my daughter's age. When I told her who I was, she said, "Mr. Clay, thank you for calling. I was cleaning out an old cabinet and found a sealed envelope. It's addressed to you, dated the day before your wife's accident." I went still. "The day before?" "Yes, sir. I can mail it if you'd rather not drive out." "No," I said quickly. "I'll come. I'd rather hold it myself." She gave me directions. It was only 40 miles, an hour's drive if you don't rush, which I didn't. Snow flurries followed me most of the way, and I thought about Margaret, about how she'd always worn red gloves when it snowed. She said they made the world look less lonely. Rebecca met me in the hospital lobby, holding a small brown envelope. It had my name written in Margaret's handwriting, the same steady loop she used when she left notes on the fridge. She smiled gently, said she'd step away to give me privacy, and left me in a quiet waiting area. I sat down, heart hammering. For a minute I just looked at the envelope. Then I opened it. Inside was a single page. Margaret's writing again, a little shaky, maybe from pain or fear, I'll never know. It said, "Walt, if you're reading this, it means something happened before I could tell you in person. I've wanted to speak this truth for years, but every time I looked at you, love made me quiet. You know how Emily always reminded you of the best parts of me? Well, Grace will remind you of the best parts of you. She's yours, Walt. I know it's a truth that will ache, but it's one you deserve to have. The girl who carried her was scared, and I tried to help. I handled the papers, thinking it would spare everyone shame. Maybe I was wrong, but I never doubted you'd love her in whatever way life allowed. Forgive me for the silence. I thought time would let me fix it, but time ran out. If love can be stronger than truth, let it be both. Love her well, Walt. She's part of us." I folded that note so carefully you'd think it was made of wings. For a long time I just sat there, staring out the window at the snow, wondering how a heart can hurt and heal at the same time. Turns out it can. When I got home, Grace was already on the porch, wrapped in a scarf, a thermos in her hand. She waved. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," I said. "Got something to show you." We sat inside by the fire, and I handed her the note. She read it twice. Then she said, "She knew." "She knew," I echoed, "and she loved us anyway." Grace's eyes filled. "I used to wonder if love was enough to make up for secrets. Maybe it's the only thing that can." "Maybe so," I said. We sat there a long while. The fire popped. The wind slid around the windows. For the first time since all this began, I felt something like peace settling in the cracks. The next few weeks, we both moved slower. Grace would call on weekday nights now, not just Sundays. Sometimes she'd tell me about a new student at the community college who reminded her of Emily. Sometimes she'd just ask how the weather was out here. Small talk that meant everything. One night she said, "Pop, I've been thinking I'd like to change my last name." "To what?" "To Clay." I didn't answer right away. My throat got tight, and I had to take a breath before I could speak. "You sure about that?" She laughed softly. "You don't sound thrilled." "Oh, I'm thrilled," I said, just trying not to cry like an old fool. That made her laugh harder. "Too late. I can hear it in your voice." And she was right. Spring came early that year. Daffodils shot up around the fence. The air smelled like mud and second chances. Grace helped me clean out the garage, something I'd been threatening to do for 10 years. We found boxes of Emily's school trophies, Margaret's recipe cards, even an old fishing pole. Grace decided to claim. When we finished, she stood in the doorway and said, "You ever realize how much life can fit inside cardboard?" "Yeah," I said. "And how heavy it gets." She smiled. "Then let's carry it together." And we did, literally and otherwise. A few weeks later, she told me she wanted to plant a tree near the cemetery. "Something for all of them," she said. "Mom, Grandma, and maybe for us, too." We picked a young maple from the nursery, thin but sturdy. Dug the hole ourselves, hands dirty, hearts steady. When it was standing straight, we each poured a shovel of soil around the roots. She said, "I read somewhere that maples grow toward the light no matter how you plant them." "Guess that's all any of us can do," I said. She smiled. "You always say something that belongs on a bumper sticker. Only if you're driving slow enough to read it." She laughed again. the kind of laugh that fills the space where sorrow used to live. That night, after she left, I sat by the window and watched lightning bugs start their slow dance over the grass. I thought about Margaret's letter, the last line especially. If love can be stronger than truth, let it be both. For years I'd thought truth and love were opposite sides of a coin. Now I saw they were just two names for the same kind of courage. I realized, too, that Margaret hadn't just left me a confession. She'd left me a path, a way to keep loving without pretending. A month later, I got invited to speak at the local community center. Grace had told one of her students about my old hardware store, and they wanted me to talk about staying rooted in small-town life. I almost said no, I'm not a man for microphones, but she insisted. So one evening I found myself standing in front of about 30 folks, most of them young enough to be my grandchildren. Grace sat in the front row, smiling encouragement. I told them about running the store, about Margaret's patience with customers who paid late, about Emily organizing a canned food drive when she was 12. Then, without planning to, I told them about secrets, how life hides them in plain sight, and how forgiveness can turn them from poison to medicine. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then Grace stood up and clapped, and soon everyone did. Not the roaring kind of applause, just soft and real. It felt like church, the good kind. Afterward, she hugged me and said, "You did good, Pop. Didn't stutter too much? Only when you said forgiveness," she teased. "That's the hardest word in the dictionary," I told her. That night, driving home under a full moon, I realized something I hadn't before. The story wasn't about loss anymore. It was about arrival. Grace had found her truth. I had found mine. And Margaret, wherever she was, had finally found peace enough to rest. A few weeks later, we went back to the lake. The maple near the cemetery had started sprouting small red buds. The air smelled like rain. We sat on that same bench and watched the ripples move across the water. Grace said, "Do you ever think Mom and Grandma are up there watching us?" "Maybe," I said. "If heaven's got a porch, I like to think they're sitting on it right now, rolling their eyes at how long it took us to figure things out." Grace laughed, then got quiet. "Thank you for not hiding the truth from me." I looked at her. "You deserve to know, and I deserve to finally say it." She reached over and squeezed my hand. Her fingers were warm, steady. "Love you, Pop," she said. "Love you too, kiddo." The sun started to slip behind the trees, turning the lake gold. We didn't talk for a long time. Didn't need to. Sometimes the silence says everything. When the first fireflies came out, she stood and said, "Let's go home." And for the first time in a long while, the word home felt like something we both belonged to. Back at the house, she put another log on the fire and started flipping through the notebook where I'd been writing our story. She smiled at the title. "My lawyer wrote to me. Call me immediately." "You sure that's not too dramatic?" she teased. "It got my attention," I said. "True." She flipped a few pages, reading quietly. "You write the way you talk," she said. "I take that as a compliment." "It is," she said softly. "It feels like listening to you on the porch." I smiled. "That's exactly how I want it to feel." She closed the notebook and handed it back. "Keep writing, Pop. The world needs stories like this. Maybe the world just needs to sit still long enough to hear one." I said. She nodded. "Then you better keep talking." And I did. That night, long after she'd gone, I sat out under the stars again, notebook open, pen resting between my fingers. The crickets sang. The air smelled like spring rain and wood smoke. I looked up and whispered, "We did it, Maggie. She knows, and she's okay." A breeze lifted across the porch, gentle, warm. If I believed in signs, I'd call it one. I smiled, wrote one last line before heading in. "Forgiveness is just love remembering its way home." And that, I figured, was as close to truth as an old man like me could ever hope to get. I've always said sunsets are the world's way of telling us, you did your best today, now rest. When you're young, you chase mornings. When you're old, you start to fall in love with evenings. These days, I spend a lot of time watching the light slip down behind the fields, thinking about what stays and what fades. It's been 2 years since that day in Harold's office, since the world tilted and steadied again. Grace still calls me Pop, still drives out every Sunday with something in a casserole dish and a new story to tell. Sometimes she brings her kids, sometimes it's just her. The porch has become our place. The same planks that once held my worry now hold our laughter. Funny thing, how time turns pain into something gentle if you let it. Last spring, she convinced me to come speak to her class again. I told her, "You just want free babysitting for your students." And she rolled her eyes the way daughters do when they've decided you're incorrigible but still love you anyway. She had me tell them about the hardware store, how business wasn't about profit but about trust, about remembering what people fix and what they can't. When I mentioned Emily, I thought my voice would break, but it didn't. It felt steady, like a stone that's been shaped smooth by water. Afterward, one young man came up and said, "Sir, I never knew my dad. Listening to you made me think maybe I still could." I shook his hand and said, "It's never too late to be found, son." And I meant it. Maybe that's the only lesson I've really earned. A few months after that, Harold retired. He stopped by one afternoon with a bottle of cheap bourbon and said, "Thought we should toast to the living while we still qualify." We sat out on the porch and talked about everything except law. He asked about Grace, and I told him she was doing well, teaching, raising good kids, filling her days with purpose. He smiled that slow, knowing smile. "You ever notice how the hardest truths end up building the strongest bridges?" I nodded. "Took me 70-some years to figure that out." He said, "That's still quicker than most." We didn't drink much, just enough to feel the warmth slide in where the chill used to be. When he left, he shook my hand tight and said, "You did right by her, Walt, both of them." That stayed with me. One day in June, Grace showed up with a box. "This is for you," she said. "Found it in Mom's attic." It was filled with letters, old ones Margaret had written but never sent. Notes about daily things, grocery lists, thank yous, a few lines that read like prayers she didn't have the courage to speak aloud. In one, she'd written, "I keep wondering if forgiveness is something you give or something you become." I showed it to Grace. She read it twice, then whispered, "Maybe both." And we let that sit between us like sunlight through glass. Summer stretched on. The maple we'd planted was taller now, its leaves full and green. We visited it sometimes, not out of duty but gratitude. Once Grace's little boy asked, "Who's the tree for?" She said, "For the people who taught us how to love even when it hurt." He nodded like that made perfect sense, and I guess it did. That night I told her, "You're raising those kids right." She said, "I learn from the best." I shook my head. "Nah, you learn from all of us, the good, the flawed, the ones who meant well even when they messed up." She smiled. "Then I guess that's the best kind of learning there is." By fall, my knees had started complaining more than usual, so she talked me into moving a recliner closer to the window. "Now you can watch the sunsets without catching pneumonia," she said. I told her she was turning into her mother. She grinned. "That's not an insult where I come from." We spent that Thanksgiving together at her house. Her husband, a quiet man named Ben, carved the turkey while Grace set an extra plate at the table. "For Mom," she said simply. We bowed our heads. I didn't pray with words, just gratitude. For the years, the second chances, the people still at the table. After dinner, the kids asked how I met Margaret. I told them about the rainstorm, the broken umbrella, and how she laughed instead of getting mad. Grace looked at me and said, "You always make it sound like fate." "Maybe it was," I said, "or maybe it was just two people deciding to show up on the same day. Either way, it worked." The youngest one said, "I hope I find someone like that." I told her, "You will if you're kind enough to deserve it." Later that night, Grace walked me to my car. "You ever think about writing all this down?" she asked. I told her I already had, more or less. She smiled. "Good, because I think stories like ours are what keep the world gentle." I said, "Gentle's not a bad goal." She nodded. "Gentle's everything." Winter returned the way it always does, quietly and all at once. The porch frosted over and the mornings came later. I found myself thinking about Emily more often, not with sadness, but with a strange kind of joy. When I saw Grace laugh, I saw a trace of Emily's smile. When I heard the kids running through the snow, I heard echoes of another childhood I once held. One snowy morning, Grace called and said, "You up for company?" "Always am," I told her. She came with coffee and her kids in tow. They built a lopsided snowman in my yard, scarf crooked, nose falling off, and she took a picture of it. "See?" she said. He looks happy, I said. He's melting, not smiling. She laughed. Perspective pop. When they left, she stuck the photo to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a heart. It's still there now, a reminder that even imperfect things can look joyful if you squint right. That spring, the maple bloomed red for the first time. I stood under it and thought about how something that began as loss had grown into shade. Grace came up beside me and said, "Mom would have loved this." I said, "She does." Grace looked at me for a moment, then nodded like she believed it. We stayed there till the sky turned pink. She said, "You ever wish you could go back?" I thought for a while. Used to, not anymore. Going back wouldn't make it better, it'd just make it different. This way we've got roots and new branches both. She smiled. That's a good answer. Comes with age, I told her, and a lot of mistakes. One night, sometime midsummer, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, too full of memory. I walked out to the porch, sat down, and started writing a letter. Not to anyone in particular, just a kind of closing. It said, "Dear whoever finds this, don't be afraid of the truth. It's rarely as cruel as the silence that hides it. And if you ever doubt love, remember it's not measured by how long someone stays, but how deep they're rooted in you after they're gone." I signed it. Walt Clay, who finally learned how to listen. I folded it, slipped it into the back of my notebook, not for mailing, just for keeping. Around my 80th birthday, Grace threw a small party. Nothing fancy, just family, neighbors, a few old friends. She'd made lemon cake, Emily's favorite. Halfway through, she handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a silver pen engraved with the words, "For the Porch Storyteller." I laughed. "You think I've still got stories left?" she said. "I think you'll never run out." Maybe she's right. Maybe every day is another story you don't know you're telling until someone asks to hear it. A few nights later, after everyone had gone, I sat on the porch again, pen in hand, notebook open. The air was warm, crickets busy, and the stars so clear they looked close enough to touch. I thought about the road I'd traveled, the letter that started it, the truths that almost broke me, the forgiveness that rebuilt me. If life's a book, I figured I was somewhere near the last few pages, but not quite the end. And that was all right. I wrote, "Love isn't what saves us. It's what makes being saved worth the trouble." Then I leaned back, listened to the night. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called once, then again. I took that as a good sign. I don't know what happens next. Maybe I've got a few more summers in me, maybe not. But I do know this. If tomorrow brings another sunrise, I'll be here for it. Coffee in hand, porch creaking beneath me, ready to listen to the quiet hum of the world being kind enough to keep going. And if someday soon my chair's empty, I hope whoever finds it sits a while before moving it. Maybe they'll hear the echo of laughter, the murmur of forgiveness, the soft rustle of leaves from that maple tree. Maybe they'll understand that every secret eventually bends toward the light, if you let it. I think that's the best any of us can hope for, to leave behind a little light, a little peace, and a story that reminds someone they're not alone. The sun's setting now, streaking the sky orange and rose. Grace will be here soon with the kids. I'll pour her a cup of coffee. We'll sit and watch the light fade, and I'll probably tell her again about that first letter, how my lawyer wrote, "Call me immediately." She'll laugh and say, "That letter changed everything." And I'll nod, because it did. It cracked my life open, and somehow that's how the love got in. I'll sit back, smile, and say, "You know, Gracie, I think the terrible truth turned out to be a beautiful one." And she'll take my hand the way she always does, and answer, "Yeah, Pop, it sure did." And that'll be enough.